what they truly want and in return gain the power over them more than before. Dangle a free carrot over the caged rabbit, and he forgets he is in a cage. Ash laughed. And your kind will work for us, Conway added. And what if we do not? David asked. Oh, I think it would be in your best interest if you were to cooperate. David knew somehow this would happen. In the back of his mind, the signs were there, and his voice silently screamed not to work with these people. It was only a matter of time before they would come after David. That is how the government and these people worked. Take out not only the opponents, but also the ones who helped you. David knew must form an alliance elsewhere and fast. Without giving them cause for suspension, David stood up and walked out. His mind raced with worrying thoughts as well as thoughts about trying to figure out how to get out of the pickle he was in. As he exited the building, his cell phone vibrated in his pocket. He quickly answered the phone in an aggressive way. On the other end was one of his informatives that worked in New York. David quickly slid into the back seat of his car and motioned for the driver to drive onward. I am listening. The male on the other end had received word of a judge in the city with powers to cancel out other supernatural powers. David almost dropped the phone when he heard this. I want you to find out if this is true. If so, get me everything on this judge. Who they are, where they are, everything. He emphasized before hanging up the phone. This power could be just what David needed as leverage against those devils. Not only them but anyone or anything that would try and come against him. David commanded his driver to bring him to the airport, since he would be flying to New York today. He needed to act quickly. Chapter 17, New York. A few days later, Colin had been non-stop on his cell phone trying to find out information on the judges close to him. The lion was devastated when he heard Jacob had perished. Gertie also informed him that Ryden, when he left him, was injured. The angel was unsure if he was even still alive. A knock at the door startled him out of his train of thought. Colin slowly lowered the phone and walked to the peephole in the door. He peeked through to see Michael standing outside. Colin never had the chance to work with a judge, but he had always heard great things about him from Ryden. Michael also was the one who created and crafted his lion paws as weapons for the battle in New Orleans. Colin opened the door and greeted the judge. Michael Bryce Wright. Colin motioned for him to enter the apartment. Yeah, Raphael the Archangel sent me here to help you out. That is excellent. I could use the help. It is rough out here. It is rough everywhere. Our little convoy was attacked. Are they all right? Colin asked. Yes, they are on their way to a safe spot. What about you? Michael asked as he followed Colin toward the living room. The men took a seat on the couch and continued to talk. I was about to head back to my home in London, but my brother informed me of who is responsible for this mess. Let me guess, Conway Ross's. Mitchell replied. Yeah, you know the bloke. Yes. I and the agency in Austin dealt with him and his friend Mammon a few years ago. Things got messy. Mitchell placed his bag on the floor beside his feet as he continued to talk. Things are always messy when fallen angels and government brats are involved. I tend to shut him and his operation down before it becomes unstoppable. Colin slides a map of the city of Washington, D.C. towards Michael, taking the fight straight to his home. I see. We did that the first time. Let's just say we were not as prepared as we should have been. Michael looked over the map as Colin sat back to think. We don't have much of a choice. No way could we storm the capital. That would be suicide. It is only us four. The other judges are barely hanging on, trying to hide themselves and others. Colin explains. We would need to do this soon before his campaign really gets underway. Then he will be moving about the country. Michael suggested. Colin ran a hand over his stubble beard and agreed. Only problem I have is we are low in numbers, and Eliza is a babe in the ways of a judge. She grew up not knowing our ways nor how to use her powers. She doesn't even know how to fight very well, but her powers make up for it, I suppose. Colin began to explain to Michael everything he knew about his cousin. Meanwhile, on the fire escape, Eliza leaned out to watch the city below. It was all crazy to her how one minute she was with her grandparents helping out at the station, and now she was in New York City on the run from the government. Eliza's mind wandered as her eyes gazed at the mechanical lights that lit up the streets and skyline. She looked up and couldn't even see the stars. Back home their glow showed so brightly, twinkling in the darkness. Her thoughts were interrupted by Otto's deep voice. Daydreaming, I see. He practically floated by her in his dark robes. She almost rolled her eyes a bit. Why on earth was he still wearing such attire in this century? I sense distaste emitting from you. Do you dislike me? Honestly, I have no clue what to think about you. Care to explain? One minute you were all dark and brooding. A mystery man in the corner. Menacing and enticing. Next, I can't help but think what an old dork following around a practical child compared to him dressed in Renaissance festival garb. Eliza had the urge to almost laugh. This made Otto a bit upset. You think of me as a mere joke. A jester for the Queen's court. He hissed as he approached her. His eyes turned completely black. I assure you, child, I am no mere man on whom you can sneer and laugh at. I have much respect for you and admire you and your gift, but don't think for 1 second you can disrespect me. His voice echoed all around her as the room began to get dark. I once sent thousands to death with the wave of my hand. Men of the highest rank feared and trembled at the mere mention of my name. I have seen into the fear and nightmares that consume kings and priests and beasts alike. I have orchestrated kingdoms to fall and villages to perish in madness, and you. Eliza's eyes widened as she could see his face turning into horrific images. Scenes of war, bloodshed, and another savagery flashed before her eyes. Her own nightmares began to mix with the visions as a black smoke consumed her. Eliza let out a scream and covered her face. Slowly the power he was emitting with all of his might was slowly draining due to her power of cancellation. Colin and Michael came bursting through the door to find Eliza huddling on the fire escape. Otto was a few feet away from her with a raised hand. Eliza's powers were canceling out Otto's, but Colin didn't care. The lion roared and quickly grabbed Otto by the collar. He slammed him into the wall. Michael pulled his sword from his jacket and pointed it at Otto. What bloody magic are you playing, Muppet? Colin's eyes glowed golden as he did his best not to shift and tear the king's throat out. Otto dropped his hands, and the mist dissipated from the room. I was teaching her a lesson, he hissed. You were scaring her half to death. Who is this freak? Michael yelled. I am no freak. Otto tried to get away from Colin to attack Michael, but between the judge's strength and Eliza draining his power, he was a bit weak. Big bad scary king using his powers on a young woman. Classy. Michael scoffed. I offered my services and this is how I am treated. Otto glared between the two men. You are lucky I don't just kill you and toss your corpse from the window. Colin gripped tighter. Why is he here anyway? Michael asked. I keep asking myself that same question, Colin replied. As the three argued, Eliza slipped out onto the fire escape stairs and made her way down to the alleyway. When her feet hit the pavement, she took off running. Her eyes were wet with tears. She regretted leaving her home now. It was a huge mistake, and Eliza thought if she could just maybe find a phone, she could call home and get away. As she reached the end of the alleyway, a car pulled out and slammed on its brakes. The window rolled down and David's head popped out. Come on, get in, David demanded. No, I don't know you. Eliza tried to put on a tough face, but the soft-hearted Native American found it hard to do. One of David's men stepped up behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. I wasn't asking. Don't worry, I swear I will not harm you. You are very special and useful to me. I don't discard or harm such things. Eliza swallowed hard and tried to push the knots in her stomach down. Wiping away a few strands of dark hair from her face, the young woman entered the car. I don't mean to frighten you, and I surely didn't intend our meeting to go like this, David explains. Who are you? Rasputin, David Rasputin. And right now you are in the safest hands of the city. As Colin and Otto continued to argue, Michael noticed that Eliza had slipped out. He let his sword fall to his side as he walked to the edge of the fire escape. He glanced down one way, hoping to see her, but quickly jolted his head towards the opposite side of the alley, when he heard car doors slam, and tires peel out on the dewy street. Colin. We have a problem. Michael shouted over the screaming match that was happening behind him. What? Colin turned to face Michael. Eliza left and I believe some car has picked her up. Michael hopped down the fire escape and slid down the stairs. When his feet hit the alley below he ran towards the street. He rounded the corner to see the car speeding down towards the next light. He made a mental note of the license plate number. There was no way he could run down a car. Colin peeked his head out from the window and yelled out towards Mike. He could see the judge at the end of the alleyway raising his hands in defeat. In a rage, Colin drew back and punched Otto with all his might. The Nightmare King fell backward to the ground. This is your fault. The lion screamed as he ran past the king on the floor and out the door. David and Eliza sat silently in his car as he sped down the streets of New York. I know it must be difficult to be who you are. A prodigy with such a power could bring kingdoms to their knees. I could help you mold that gift. David paused and glanced at Eliza, who sat across from him. Her hands were in her lap as her eyes were cast downward. If only I had your gift, and if you only knew of its potential. Another long pause passed before David continued speaking. You know, my father wanted power. So much so that he left his first family to seek the vows of a holy man. Holy, he was far from. The acts and beliefs they held were more perverse. However, his charisma and character caught the eye of the Russian royals. A mere peasant rose to such heights, and he didn't even have half the power you possess. Not even half the power I possess either. Just think of the possibilities that I and you can accomplish. I don't want to. All I want is to go home to my tribe. Eliza did her best to push back the tears, but they flowed. It is too late for that now, miss. You are deep in this game. If you wish to survive, you better start playing along. Chapter 18. David exited his car and stood waiting for Eliza. She glanced over towards him and then back at the empty seat in front of her. I can't have you sleeping in the car. Come on. I will get you fed and in proper clothes. Then you can get a night's sleep before we begin to discuss matters. Eliza had no choice but to do what he said. She couldn't fight. She had no training. Even if she could, David and his men could pin her down and hogtie her with ease. Eliza had to play things cool. She knew no doubt his cousin would come to find her. As long as she had hope for her rescue, she wouldn't let the circumstances get to her. Eliza exited the car slowly and glanced up at the large mansion. David's home resembled that of an old-style abbey as she read in her books. If he wasn't a villain, she would take him for a proper prince, whisking her away to his castle. But this was far from a romance novel and more of a nightmare kidnapping. When Eliza walked into the doorway, a maid and butler were there to greet them. David gave his orders to the maid to have Eliza bathed and dressed, while the butler was to have the kitchen prepare them a late dinner. The servants bowed before jumping to their duties. The maid turned and began to escort Eliza upstairs. Eliza did not want to go. The maid tried to give her a reassuring smile, but Eliza walked ever so slowly up the 2 large flights of stairs. Don't be afraid, miss. Sir David never conducts any type of violence in his home. He is really a gracious man. He would never harm you, especially not here. She tried to make her feel at ease, but it really wasn't working. He can be a cruel man on the streets, but he really is a fair and just master. Why, I was picked from the streets and given a home here. Me and my boy. Sir David has given us so much. The maid opened the door to one of the rooms for Eliza to enter. There's a bathroom connected to your room and a closet full of beautiful clothes. Just ring the bell if you need me, okay? The chipper dark-haired woman smiled and did her best to get Eliza to smile as well, but the young woman just entered the room with the same downcast eyes. An hour later, Eliza was led to the dining room by the smiling maid. She now wore an ombre blue dress that shimmered purple when the light hit it. It was made of flowing silk and draped to the floor. It was the simplest thing in the closet, but it was still the most expensive thing Eliza had ever worn. She made her way to the large table and took a seat. When her chair was pushed in, a waiter poured her a drink as another server brought her a plate of food. She could feel David watching her from across the table, but she dared not look up. After the servers were done, they left the two alone to speak privately. I hope you were able to ease up now that you know you are in no danger here. David broke the silence as he began to eat. Eliza sat with her hands in her lap. Her eyes studied the food in front of her. It is not poison. I told you, you are special to me. You don't even know me. She finally spoke up. No, but I know of your powers. Is that all that I am? My powers. She huffed in frustration. No, you seem to be an intelligent and reserved young woman. Beautiful, tender-hearted, humble. I am far from the bad guy people paint me out to be. Yes, I can be excessive in the things I do and have done. Yes, I have a history of violence and confrontation, but I had to do those things. I had to make a name for myself. I had a huge shadow hanging over me, and if I was to outshine the cursed last name of mine, I had to do those things. I admit I picked the wrong side in the war. Hopefully, it is not too late to switch sides. Look, I have no clue who you are, nor do I know what you have done. I am sure if you bring me back to my cousin, we can work out a deal. I don't think that will fly with Jameson. You see, it is my men who attacked and killed most of those judges. I know, bad calling me, and hey, it was just business. I never really had to deal with the judges. I have always done my best to stay clear, but I bet on the wrong horse and lost. Eliza was a bit horrified and confused all at once. Conway Ross's. He paid me to take out his enemies. David explained as Eliza finally picked up a fork and began to slowly eat the food. Even though she was captured, she didn't want to be hurt, and her stomach was growling. Meanwhile, as Michael drives a rental car down the streets of New York, Colin quickly phones Rue. She was Connor's tech, and if anyone could help them, this hacker could. As the line spoke with the raccoon shifter, Michael glared at Otto, who sat in the back seat sulking. What are you glaring at, Judge? He hissed as he scoffed at Michael. You know this is all your fault. I don't see how. You don't see how. You were a major jerk to that girl. You supernaturals, man, I swear. Always throwing your powers around trying to frighten or eat someone. Michael had to slam the brakes before he ran a red light. Colin glared over at Michael as he listened to the phone. She disrespected me. So what, dude? You were like 500 years old. Act like it. Such a child, geez. Michael shook his head and waited for directions. Take this next right up ahead. Colin directed. For the rest of the trip, I do not want to hear not another word from you. Colin turned to face Otto and glared. Otto rolled his eyes and turned to face the window. Why are we still keeping this guy around? Michael asked Colin. To be honest, I do not know, but in the meantime, he is going to help us get Eliza back. Colin continues to go back and forth with Rue and Michael. The three finally arrived at the mansion on the hilltop. The men parked off the road and snuck onto the wooded backyard. Rue says David doesn't like to have violence conducted in his home, so if we can get in, we might have a shot at getting her back, Colin explains. The lion thanked the coon and hung up the phone. It was a little past midnight, and David moved their conversation from the dining room into the den. A large fire was slowly burning, while David and Eliza sat on leather furniture facing the fire. "I heard of your father, Flynn." This made Eliza sit up straight and look toward David. He had her full attention. "He was once a judge, you know, but he gave all that up. He also was a doctor. I heard he gave all that up due to an issue with his ex-wife and brother." David explains. "I hear he stole a machine from the government, and ever since has been on the run with it." "A machine?" "Yes. A sort of teleportation or time machine. I cannot recall which, but I do know he found more in life than being a judge and serving a silent God." David was doing what he could to persuade Eliza to join him. He knew he struck a nerve when he brought up her father. "I can track him for you if you like." David smiled a bit as he tried to reel her in. Eliza was no dummy. She knew the game he was playing. "Yeah, I am sure you could, if I joined you, correct?" David's smile slowly faded as she spoke. "My father left me and my mother. Maybe it was to help us in the world, maybe not. But he is gone and never has tried to reach out to me. My cousin Colin just found out that I existed, and right away he came to my aid, so no. I do not care to know about or be with my father. Nor do I wish to stab my cousin or the rest of my family in the back." David rose from his seat and tossed the glass into the fire. For a split second, the flames turned an eerie green as the alcohol burned. "You foolish girl. You could rule this world with that power, especially with me by your side. I don't want to rule the world, and I definitely do not want anything to do with you." She rose to her feet and glared at him. Suddenly a large lion leaped through the windows. Glass and woods rained down on them as Colin let out a mighty roar as he stood beside his cousin. Michael kicked one of the guards through the double wooden doors, causing them to splinter. Right behind the judge was the Nightmare King. He gripped a guard by the throat and fed off his fear. This time he was not as pale as he normally was. No doubt being around Eliza for those few days was having an effect on him. Normally he would have killed his opponent, but not only was his powers changing due to her but his humanity. He dropped the man to the ground and glanced toward Eliza. David used his hand to summon a fireball from the fireplace, but the flame flickered a bit. He tossed it at Colin, but the lion knocked Eliza and himself out the way. Michael rushed David as Otto stayed to fight the guards trickling in to aid their master. Michael and David fought a bit, but David got the upper hand and tossed Michael back. The Nightmare King rushed David with a grin. "I see you switched sides, old man," David hissed. "Not really, I just don't like you or your father." The king chuckled as black smoke filled the room. The two men used their powers on each other, but since Otto had been around Eliza so long, he was working at only 40% of his capability. Even her being in the room drained not only him but David as well. When David got the upper hand, Otto fell backward on the carpet. It was the first time the king had been defeated in centuries, and the shock of it almost got him killed. Colin leaped over the king and pounced on David. Heavy paws came down on him as he was now on his own floor trying to block the blows. Eliza helped Michael toss a man out the window before sprinting over to Otto and extending her hand. He slowly took it and stood to his feet. "I wish to apologize for being so cruel and rude." Otto kept his eyes to the ground. Eliza knew this took a lot for the prideful king to admit. A faint smile showed as she accepted his apology. Otto's whitish skin was now peach color. His eyes were completely normal, and his dang black cloak had hints of gold weaving in it. "You all are crazy for coming here." Eliza glanced back at Michael, who was breathing heavily. He wiped his blade and glanced over at Colin, who was still attacking David. "We could not let you be harmed or a weapon in the hands of David," Otto explained. "Plus, you are a judge and family. You and Colin are blood. Also, Judges help other judges no matter what, so you are like family to me as well. Michael explained. Colin had his jaws around Dave's neck about to clamp down, but David surrendered. Once David surrendered, Colin lifted his jaw, but placed a paw on his chest to keep him down. Did you really think you could have gotten away with this? Colin growled. Honestly, yes. I hoped Eliza would turn sides, but she is nothing like her father. David spoke between heavy breaths. I had no choice. It is only a matter of time before Conway comes for me and the ones like me who won't bow to him and his devils. Tell me everything you know, and call off the hits on the judges, and I will allow you to live. Colin lifted his paw and sat in lion form waiting. The magician sat up and adjusted his vest and hair. David then begins to tell Colin and the others everything, and he knows about the plans he has heard and the location he knew about. One more thing, one of your judges, a female. She is alive and being held for ransom. Pamela Dean. David dropped the name and Michael grew furious. Where is she? He stepped forward gripping his sword. It took all of him to restrain himself from punching David. Chapter 19. David explained to them Pamela was being held a few miles away from where Conway had a country home. She was to be used for leverage if anyone would attack him there. David gave them all the info on Conway's home layout, as well as the fact he was going to be hosting a party there in a few days. Without any more delay, the four set off to their destination. Colin needed to see his brother and raid his weapons closet. Michael, of course, went ahead of them. He needed to get to Pamela and fast. Michael had grown feelings for Pamela. Not just a deep friendship bond, but he could feel himself becoming romantically attached to the Israel judge. It had been years since his wife Grace had passed away, and even though he vowed to never marry again, his heart was longing for companionship. If anyone was worthy of Judge Michael, it was Pamela. She was strong, independent, modest, and hard-working. Her character was just and upright, plus she had grace and beauty. Michael was a bit afraid to tell her of his feelings because he was not sure if she felt the same for him. None of this mattered now. Michael just needed to help her escape the prison she was in. He would dare not say or rescue her. She would not have it that way. Her fierce warrior spirit and a tad bit of pride would not allow her to be a damsel in distress. She was more like a queen in need of assistance. While Michael fought his feelings due to his duty, Otto began to let his feelings show. He could not help but continue to fancy Eliza. The king could not decide if it was love or deep admiration, or the fact she was allowing him to feel human again. To have warmth, mortality, and purpose. After Colin retrieved the weapons from Connor, the three were off to Washington, D.C. Along the way, Otto and Eliza sat in the back of the van. Eliza for the most part was silent, but Otto had quite a lot to say. First off, he continually apologized for the way he had previously treated her. Parts of his old ways were cropping up. Ways he wishes to try and change now that he knows Eliza. She was his chance to start over, a second chance at life, and he did not want to waste it. He began showing her that he was turning human, and her powers were to be thanked. How at one time he lusted for power and the abilities he had, but now he realized how much pain and suffering they had caused. He also admitted how lonely it was to have them, and how others looked towards him due to them. Otto also concluded that the more afraid or angry Eliza got, the quicker and more powerful her powers were. They also didn't affect Colin, the reason most likely being it probably only affected non-blood family members. Otto also made an oath to her. The oath was that he will help not only Eliza but Colin in their mission. He even made an oath that if need be, he would lay his life down for her. In his eyes, Eliza was rare and pure. She needed to be protected. The world needed her and her powers greatly. Other supernaturals could benefit from her abilities to help them change back into humans. Otto's knighthood was showing, and Eliza was flattered. She admired his bravery in pouring his heart out to her. Colin listened to the conversation as he drove towards their destination. Even though he could tell Otto was being truthful by using his powers, Colin deep down did not trust Otto. It was something about him that made him uneasy. He knew it most likely was the fact that he was such a horrible being of darkness, that had dark tales and even darker songs written about him. Colin knew all humans deserve a second chance if they wish to change, but when it came to his family, Colin was extra cautious. Time and time again, people who claimed to change always ended up stabbing him in the back. It was part of the job, policing such creatures and criminal humans. Colin was sort of molded into the way he thought due to the interactions he had with them daily. Colin was a very hard person to gain trust from, but something he tried to never give up on was family. You two need to get some rest. It is going to be a 6-hour drive. Once we make it a little over halfway, I am going to stop and get us a hotel, Colin explained. Eliza yawned and stretched out a bit. She laid her head against the window and tried to get some sleep. Michael was a few hours ahead of them. He too was feeling the effects of a late night, but he had to push himself onward. The judge would drive onward until he could no longer focus on the road. He knew he had to keep a low profile due to his kind being wanted and even killed on sight. As much as Michael wanted to push forward, he needed sleep. It was nearly 3 a.m., and the exhaustion would only endanger them both. The judge pulled off the road and parked in the back of an abandoned building. He shut off the car and leaned the car seat back. It was not the most comfortable of settings, but it would have to be. The morning light woke the judge up from his slumber. It was one of the worst night's sleep he had ever had, but at least he was able to rest up. Without wasting any more time, Michael started up the car and drove off down the highway. He would need to stop at a gas station to freshen up and get some coffee as well as fuel up. He tried to make every minute count as he raced towards Pam's location. When he reached the gas station, he gave Colin a quick text on his location. There was no response. Colin no doubt had to stop as well to get some sleep. The night before was a very long and daunting one. Michael fueled up and grabbed a quick bite to eat. On the TV overhead, Conway was front and center in a dead over his current push for supernaturals. One woman asked if killing off one group such as the judges was not hypocritical, and the very opposite of what Conway should be accomplishing, but the congressman had a long flowery explanation on why it was not. Michael rolled his eyes and exited the gas station. No doubt Ashera and their great master Satan were the puppet masters behind all this. In any other scenario, this would seem to be madness, but without the written words, media push, and zombie-like following, they had this selection in the bag. Michael quickly started up the rental car and peeled out of the gas station. He could not let anything distract him from going to find Pam and helping her escape. He prayed she was not harmed. Pamela sat on the cot in a low-lit room. The place where she was being held was a sort of cabin in the woods. She did her best to fight and escape a few times, but with the number of sedatives they pumped into her, the attempts were in vain. Pam had finally settled down and began to pray. She prayed for not only guidance on what she should do, but for someone, anyone to come to her aid and escape. Pamela was well known in the judge community, but the recent events that have occurred with the judge having to underground no doubt contributed to her being forgotten. It was not in the judge's nature to be selfish, but in the end they were human just like the rest of the world. The basic instinct to survive would no doubt have kicked in. Pam just prayed that a few would not succumb to this human drive, and ask for strength for God to push through the tribulation. As Christians and judges, they knew better than anyone how tribulation would come. This might not have been the great tribulation foretold in Revelations, but it was a preview of what was to come. The guards that surrounded the cabin were a group of various species. Wolves, vampires, and the one who led them was a blind samurai gifted with a soul-sucking sword. Pam could often hear the scream from the blade, and her heart wept for them. No doubt if she was able to escape, Pam would do her best to free those locked inside, so they could meet God. If anyone was patient, it was Pamela. That was a hard lesson the judge had to learn early on in her life. She learned to get alone with God and pray and wait on Him to guide and change her situations. She knew He was always preparing her for the troubles ahead that needed this skill, and today it was one of those days. As Pamela sat cross-legged on the cot, a small tapping sound was heard on the window. At first, she brushed it off as a tree branch of an animal, but the sound grew louder and more in tune with how someone would sound if they were tapping. One of her eyes opened as she peeked at the side of the room. Pamela looked past the barred window and noticed a tip of a sword tapping on the glass. No way would it be Abe that samurai doing this. He was not that type of bad guy to tease his victims. Curiosity got the best of her, and Pamela rose up from the cot she was sitting on and walked over to the window. She peeked through the bars and downward. It was Michael crouched outside in the foliage that surrounded the cabin. Pam could not help but smile, not only at the sight of him, but how he looked bent down trying to hide. "You were never really good at hide and seek, huh?" Pamela teased. Michael could just barely hear her from the closed window, but he smiled, letting her know she was right. He motioned to her that he was going to start the attack on the outside guards. Pam knew she needed to make a distraction for the inside guards to focus on her. The female judge nodded and began to scream in Hebrew. A few guards flung open the door with a syringe in hand. Pamela kicked the needle from his hand and uppercut the other guard. Pam ran past them smirking as she made her way towards the inside of the small cabin. Mitchell heard the commotion inside and sprung into action. There was no fighting to stun, the judges knew it was fighting to kill. As two guards ran past Michael, he leapt from the trees he was hiding behind and cut them down. Without any more delay, Michael ran towards the front of the cabin. He reached for the doorknob, but it was flung open. Michael raised his sword to strike, but stopped when he saw it was Pam. They both reached out to each other to embrace. "I am so glad you have come to help me." Pamela slowly let Michael go but kept her hands on his forearms. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "I have a lot to explain, but I will later. First, let me help you to get out of here." Michael turned to walk towards the wooded area, but he was halted. Abe stepped out from the tree line and stood there with his sword in hand. "Your boss has called off his hits," Michael called out as he gripped his own sword tight. "Even if that is true, you have caused a great offense to me. You have killed my men." Abe removed his sole sword and the metal glinted in the sunlight. Pamela winced a bit as she could hear the cries of the poor souls trapped. Pam walked and stood beside Michael. Although she herself didn't have any weapons, she was going to help Mike in this fight. The seconds that passed felt like hours. The anticipation in the air was thick, and soon it was sliced by Abe's sword. The blind man swung his sword towards them, and it was met by Michael's. Pamela swung at the man's face, but he somehow dodged it. "You sure he is blind?" Mike grunted as he pushed him back. The two continued to fight Abe. For a human, he was well skilled. He was able to square off with not just one, but two very skilled judges. Abe knew he needed to take one of them out quickly. There was no doubt if they both continued to attack him he would be overtaken. Abe quickly slashed Pam and kicked her in the stomach. She went tumbling backward. This left him open and Mike brought his sword down on Abe. It caught his leg, slashing it deeply. The blind man turned to face the other judge. Michael wanted to run and help Pam, but he had to focus on this fight. If Abe won, they would be stuck in his sword. The angered Michael brought his sword down on Abe's with so much might that his blade cracked. A few more hits and the blade splintered and shards of steel fell to the ground. Abe used his blade to stab Michael in the shoulder. The judge let out a scream in pain as he reached up and tried to remove the blade. The distraction allowed Pam to roll forward, grab a piece of Michael's sword, and slam it into Abe's foot. The black samurai let out a scream in pain. Abe went to strike Pam with his hand, but Michael threw the hilt and remaining sharp end of the sword straight at Abe. The splintered shards of remaining steel that were attached to the hilt hit Abe in the head. Abe swayed a bit before falling backward. Michael quickly pulled out Abe's sword and dropped it to the ground. He used one of his hands to hold his wound, while his other cupped Pam's face. "Are you all right?" he asked as he knelt in front of her. Pamela nodded and was more focused on helping him with his injury. "Am I all right? You are the one who is bleeding. Well, you are also." Mike wiped the small amount of blood from the scratch on her eyebrow. "Foolishness. It is just a scratch." Pamela held her hand on top of his, applying pressure. The two judges' eyes connected for a moment. Michael leaned in, and Pamela thought he was going to kiss her, but he wrapped his arm around her to help her up. Mike did want to kiss Pamela, but there was no time for it. He needed to break that sword and get back to Colin. He made excuses to avoid his feelings, and hoped that they could just be pushed down. No way would Pamela be interested in him, or he thought. "Let's get you stitched up and get these poor souls out of this sword." Pamela walked past him and bent down to grab the sword. She studied it as they walked back to the cabin. "I will need my forging tools from the car," Michael explained. "It is the only way to break this sword. You get cleaned up and find a first aid kit, and I will go and get your tools." "Where is your car?" Pamela asked. Michael pointed with a bloody finger towards the woods where his car was. Pamela took a step forwards and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Thank you." She smiled and turned to walk towards the car. Michael was a bit stunned and his cheeks flushed a bit. Her kiss somehow made the pain dull a bit. Pamela returned with Michael's tools. She helped him clean his wound and stitch it closed. After Mike was patched up, he dug in his bag to retrieve his tools. He turned the stove's fire on and began working away on the sword. "It won't be as hot as my forge, but I will have to make this work," he sighed. After a few hours of constant work, Mike broke Abe's sword. The shattering of the blade opened up a small portal. Souls from inside poured out and escaped. The final soul was more of a body. The portal stretched wide and Tim fell from the portal. Because of his curse, Tim was the only person to go in fully. "I guess the samurai was wrong. My curse is still in effect." Tim frowned a bit. "You know, if you go to God about that curse you can." Pamela tried to explain, but Tim cut her off. "No, I don't want anything to do with him." Tim's jaw clenched. "Why?" "After all, have you seen and been through?" Michael asked. "Yeah, look at all this destruction and pain and slaughtering. I never wanted to get caught up in your guys' mess. I was happy just living my life and going on my adventures." He scoffed. Pamela's anger slowly subsided, and a motherly type of tone and expression came across her face. "Timothy, we all go through the pain and hurt. God did not want this for us. It is not his fault. It is man's and the devil's fault for this messed up world. You need to understand that." She tried to explain to him, but Tim was still emotional about being stuck in the sword. He did not want to hear the reason. "Why is it when you tell others of spiritual things they cannot see or understand? Maybe it is why I don't do this or that, or have this item in my home, or mess with things like yoga, crystals, tarot cards act. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." 2 Corinthians 4:4. "For those who are living according to the flesh, set their minds on the things of the flesh which gratify the body, but those who are living according to the Spirit, set their minds on the things of the Spirit as will and purpose." Romans -8:5. Most won't see it because they can't see it due to ignorance blindness. Others can't see it because they don't want to see it, even when you tell them about it. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. Hos 4:6. People don't want to look in the Bible or research things for themselves. Then they turn around and throw mud at you to warn them. Why do they hate me when I do tell them the truth? If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. John 15:18. In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. 2 Timothy 3:12. Tim did not want to hear anything. He had a taste of persecution and did not want to continue in that path. Pamela sighed and handed him a cell phone. Here, if you change your mind and want to talk, I will be happy to. Tim took the phone and nodded. They had a few motorbikes on the side of the shed. You can take one of them. Just lay low and you should be all right, Michael explained. Tim gave them a thumbs up and quickly made his way out the cabin. I hope he comes around. Michael sighed deeply. That is up to him. We cannot make that decision for him, Pamela replied. The two judges continued to talk as they left the cabin and made their way towards Michael's car. They needed to find and meet up with Colin in order to plan their next move. Chapter 20. Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Michael and Pamela met up with Colin and the others at the hotel they were staying at. The group rested up and planned their attack on the congressman's place in Maryland by Chesapeake Bay. No doubt his place had to be nestled out of the city and in the woods of the state. They needed solitude to conduct their rituals and sit parties. Pamela changed Michael's bandages as Eliza sat and watched them. The way they acted towards each other, she could have sworn they were a couple. When she asked, both of them blushed and avoided the question. While the three chatted, Colin stood outside on the balcony with Otto. Just to make things clear, I still don't trust you. I don't care what you promised or swore to Eliza, I do not trust you. He emphasized every word. That is fair, Jameson. I never trusted you either, but we both have a few things in common. I care for the damsel, and I wish to see that devil woman with Conway pay. Ashera was the one who gave me these powers. She once was my consort and we produced a daughter together. Once I was trapped in the dark dimension, she left me there to rot. Otto explained. He had never told anyone this information before, and Otto knew Colin could tell if he was lying or not. The lion's other power of telling lies from the truth was well known in the supernatural community. With this revelation, Colin eased back and stood there in silence. Thank you for your honesty, but just know that I still will keep my eyes on you. Even though you are their enemy. The enemy of mine can still be my enemy. Colin turned to walk back into the room, leaving the king alone with his thoughts. The three were talking and Eliza was even laughing a bit. Colin smiled at the sight. For most of the trip, the poor thing was down in the dumps. It was nice to have Pamela give her some female company. The two females took a room for themselves while Mike, Colin, and Otto had to share one. Mike and Colin made Otto sleep on the floor. Mike pulled the injury card, while Colin just flat out told Otto that His Highness had to try the lifestyle of a peasant that night. Even though the judges were in a comfortable bed, no one slept that night. Each one of the members of this group of rebels had their own worries and fears about what was going to happen tomorrow. The next afternoon they gathered their things and began to pack up the vehicles. They wanted to head out earlier, but Colin wanted to give Michael more time to heal up. The judges were blessed with faster healing than normal humans. This was due to the fact they had to battle the supernatural, who also had faster healing rates. It was a little bonus God tossed in with their abilities. In a day or two, the wound would no doubt be totally healed, but they did not have that amount of time. They had to head out tonight in order to catch Conway. What is up with the rape van? Michael asked as they walked to the parking lot. Colin shot him a look. It is not a rape van, he hissed. Eliza covers her mouth to not show her smile. What is a rape van? Otto looked at the others, trying to figure out what they were talking about. Dude, all you need is free candy written on a note. So what do you suggest? I spray it like some 80s heavy metal style cover. Have a dragon breathing fire with sparkles, Colin asked, glaring at Mike. Well, that might be cool actually, Michael teased. Will you two stop? I have a headache already. Pamela shook her head in disapproval as she walked to Mike's rental car. How did Ryden put up with you? Colin asked himself out loud. Michael did not reply. He just smiled and opened up the driver's side door. We are going to get a bite to eat, then we will make our way towards Conway's home, Colin explains. You know there will be a small army of people there, right? Michael replied. Yes. I know, but we have to get to Conway before he becomes too protected. Once he is on his campaign trail and the president, no one will be able to touch him. Michael nodded in agreement as he walked towards his car. He slid inside and started it up. Colin did the same and led them towards a small diner downtown. That night, the sun had finally settled behind the trees where Five had parked and waited. It was a good distance from Conway's summer home, which was nestled between the trees and bay. Colin used binoculars to watch the various cars drive up and drop off people in the front of the mansion. I count a dozen so far. Their guards seem to be staying on the outside of the building, but that does not mean we will not have trouble inside, Colin explains. Michael sat back with the others and was sharpening a spare sword he had. He was still upset that he had broken his sword during the fight with Abe. That sword was special because it was one he and his father had made together. Pamela spoke with Eliza and Otto was staring off in the distance. Otto, I need you to stay here with Eliza. Colin turned to face the group. Eliza was a bit relieved she didn't have to go in there and fight a bunch of people. She was not trained, and she did not like the fact of hurting others, even if they were bad guys. Eliza knew she would just be in the way, and the others would have to worry about her safety rather than the fight. Otto agreed and did not protest. He had vowed to protect Eliza. He did not care what happened to the others. If things go wrong, I want you to take her out of here. I want you to promise to bring her to Connor. Colin glared at Otto. He did not like having to put this much amount of trust in this nightmare king. You have my word, Lion. Otto agreed to Colin's terms. He walked over and stood beside Eliza. Pamela rubbed and patted Eliza's shoulder lovingly like a big sister. Don't worry. God is on our side. Pam's words were somewhat comforting, but Eliza was new to this in faith. She wanted to believe everything was going to work out, but her mind was so focused on the amount of people and the horrible circumstances. The three judges made their way down the hill and through the small patch of woods towards the mansion. They were still plotting how exactly they were going to get inside and take out Conway. Maybe the servants' entrance, Michael suggested. No, they will no doubt be swarming and busy down there preparing for the guests. Colin reminded him that there was a party going on. Is it a sacrifice night for them? Pamela asked. I have not been keeping up with the days. So much has been going on, I still don't know if it is March, May, or even Monday. Colin grumbled. It is May 1st, so yes, it is a sacrificial night for them. Tonight is Beltane, Michael replied. Beltane is a time of fire and fertility. Combine the passion of our roaring bonfire with the love of the May Queen, and the god of the forest. Pamela explains. Great, just great. We have to go in and take down these bunch of naked sods, Colin complained the whole way as the three walked closer and closer. Retirement made you lazy, Colin. Michael poked fun at the lion. Not lazy, just fed up with seeing naked butts and floppy boobs every time we have to take down these idiots. I have a wife. I don't want to see all that mess. Oh, at first I thought you might have meant man boobs. Michael chuckled. Pamela covered her own smile as she walked beside him. We really could have used Tim's help right now. Michael's smile faded. He made his choice, Michael. Sometimes people change when it benefits them. And when it stops benefiting them, they revert back to their old ways. We may be few, but remember Gideon and his army. The small number of men overtook the enemy. Yeah, and those were fully dressed soldiers. These idiots will most likely be half naked. Colin scoffed again. Let us try and get in there early before the clothes start coming off then. Pamela sprinted ahead of the men towards the side of the manor. She noticed the lattice work went upwards to the second floor, and the female judge began to climb upwards. Michael followed behind her and then Colin. Pam lifted her leg up and over the railing and onto the small balcony. She then shimmied the small window open and squeezed inside. Michael waited for her to unlock the door, since he was too tall to squeeze through the small window. Once she opened the door, Michael and Colin made their way inside. They stepped over a knocked-out guard Pamela had hit when she entered. Now where? Michael asked. My bed is in the basement. Everything always happens in a bloody basement, Colin whispered. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the manor, Baron Hans, Bride the Valkyrie, and Pepper the judge sat in a small rowboat. Pepper was paddling in the back while Hans paddled in the front. Bry had a pair of binoculars out with night vision and kept watch for anything. Hans and Bry had helped Judge Starr relocate the other hunters and judges. When they were safe, the two made their way to Chicago where they met up with Pepper. Destruction had also visited that city, and Pepper knew he and the others could not stay put. After leaving Chicago, Pepper led a few of the people from that area into West Virginia, where he knew a couple of people that could help. While there, the few hunters and judges recouped and plotted their next move. Baron's connections informed him that Conway would be hosting a party at his summer home during the Beltane celebration. Hans knew this would be the perfect time to not only take Conway out, but a good bit of his supporters. Each one of them that was on this small boat had lost friends and close allies due to Conway's actions. They all knew he had to be stopped before becoming the leader of the nation and causing even greater destruction. As they grew closer, the two men stopped paddling and let the boat hit the shore. Hans was the first to hop out and drag the boat a bit onto the pebble beach, so the others could exit. Pepper picked up the back of the boat and laid it on its side on the shore, before making his way towards the woods that ran along the bay. The three were not as cautious as the other three judges. Instead of sneaking around back or some other way, they went straight for the front door. The Baron walked right up the steps and towards the front door. A few guards tried to stop him, but Conway waved his hand. You have some nerve to show up here, Hans Dubbeck. Conway's mouth turned upwards into a cocky smile. That is Baron to you, peasant. I was born into royalty. You attempt to buy into it, but no matter how much money you have or throw around, you will never be me. Baron kept his eyes fixed on Conway. You may be royalty, but you are the last of your bloodline. I tend to create my own tonight. I am so happy that you are here to witness it. Conway motioned for the guards to grab the Baron, but he punched one square in the jaw. The other male grabbed Hans from behind, but he stomped on the guard's foot. Hans then headbutted the guard with the back of his head, causing him to fall back down the steps. Conway started shouting orders for his guards to get the Baron, but his voice was overtaken by Hans. Like the Great Spices girls say, if you want to be my lover, you gotta get with my friends. Bullets blazed past the Baron and hit the few guards that were around him. A few of the people that were around them ran inside screaming. Conway's eyes went wide as his own guard dragged him inside. Pepper and Brynhildr continued to rain bullets down on the guest as they walked toward the Baron. Hans took out his own gun and began to fire at Conway. When the sounds of gunfire echoed throughout the mansion, the three judges ran towards the edge of the stair railing. People were screaming and running while bullets ricocheted all around. What is going on? Colin tried to see if he recognized the people fighting Conway's men. Pamela pointed down to the man in the fur-trimmed coat. That is Baron Dubbeck. She smiled. How do you know that? Michael yelled over the sound of the gunfire. Long story short, we used to date. Pamela ran past the boys and down the stairs. Michael made a face and Colin picked up on it. Don't worry, mate, she only has eyes for you now. The lion teased as he followed her down. A few of the guards that noticed the other three tried to climb the stairs to attack, but they were quickly knocked down by Pamela and Colin. Michael jumped from the railing down to the first floor. He landed on his feet and quickly joined the fight. Show off. Colin yelled as he followed Pamela down the stairs. Michael took down the men in front of him and turned to see Hans point a gun at him. Pamela slid in front of Mike and held her hands up. Hans, we are on the same side. Hans lowered his gun and grinned. Who is your new boyfriend? He asked. Judge Michael, Bryce and Colin are over there. We are here to take down Conway. I have a new girlfriend too, he smiled. We are not together. Bryce somehow heard Hans's and she yelled at him. Pamela chuckled a bit as she dodged a guard coming towards them. Can we play catch up later? Conway is getting away. Michael cut through them and ran towards the back of the house. Chapter 21. Conway could not believe the nerve these judges had attacking him in his own home. Even after all he had done to stop them, they were here in his home killing his guests and guards. The military in him wanted to fight back, but he knew he could not afford to be injured or killed. He was to be the leader of not only the free world, but the world government being set in place. The ultimate power he dreamed of was just in reach. All he had to do was play it smart and do as he was told. I do not see how you can control this situation. There are only 6 of them. Conway yelled as he was being pushed towards the back door. Pepper slid past Colin and Michael as he chased after Conway. The men that were chasing Pepper ran into the 2 other judges. Mike and Colin squared off with them as Pam and Hans began clearing out the other guest. Bry ran ahead and tried to flank Conway. She reached him and his 4 guards and began to engage in a fight. The 4 men at first were easy to fight off, but soon Conway tried to chime in. Pepper slid across the floor and ran toward Bry to help her. He shot one of the guards and punched another. Conway caught Bry off guard and punched her in the stomach. Bry stumbled backwards, and the 2 remaining guards began to swing at her. Pepper used the butt of his empty gun to swing at Conway, and made contact with Conway's arm, as the congressman tried to block the blows. The 2 men then proceed to get into a fist fight, as Bry struggles to take down the remaining guards. She could tell they were not human as it was hard to fight up against them. The Valkyrie was able to knock out the men, but the other tackled her, and the 2 went flying into a den-like area. Colin and Michael fought back to back against the remaining people. It was a handful of guards and guests who picked up various items to try and use against the judges. The guests were human, so they were easy to cut down, but the guards no doubt were possessed or given powers to protect their masters. When it was looking that the 2 were going to be overtaken, Colin shifted into his lion form. The huge lion began to maul and slash the guards back. Michael slashed his sword and backed a few guests back. Once they walked through a double doorway. He quickly shut the doors and slipped a piece of broken chair leg through the handles, trapping them inside. Michael then ran and hopped over the raging lion to strike down more enemies. A large wolf dropped from the top floor and landed beside Mike. Its huge jaws went to chop down on his face, but Mike lodged his sword between the jaws, trying to block the snapping teeth. Colin used his large paw to swipe away a large man before glancing back at Mike struggling against the wolf. Colin let out a roar as he jumped and tackled the wolf to the ground. The force made even Michael stumble backwards and land on the ground. The two massive animals rolled around as fur and blood flew in the air. The wolf pinned Colin down, but not for long. Michael jumped up and rammed his sword in the back of the wolf's head. The blade pierced through the back of the skull and exited the wolf's mouth. The lion looked up at Mike, and the judge could almost swear he saw the lion smile. Pamela and the Baron fended off the front door, stopping the other guards from trying to enter the mansion. The Baron could not help but flirt with his ex during the fighting. Pamela was flattered, but her heart was slowly forming feelings for another. Hans, as much as I enjoy the compliments and flirting, I must be honest, she pauses to kick a man down the stairs, before glancing towards Hans. We were never going to last, nor are we ever going to be a thing again. Pamela's eyes betrayed her when she glanced back at Michael to make sure he was okay. The Barons noticed her looking back behind them. His eyes followed hers and noticed Michael on top of the wolf with a sword through its mouth. Ah, I see. So it is true. I could never amount to that amount of manliness, that is for sure. He teased a bit. Who else can say they stabbed a werewolf that was on top of a giant lion? Then the Baron laughed as he grabbed the front door and slammed it shut finally. As he held it shut, Pamela locked the door along with the deadbolts. You are too much, Hans. Pamela shook her head with a grin. Bry was still wrestling with the man in the den area. He had her on top of the pool table choking her. Her fingers reached around and finally found one of the pool balls. She grabbed it and swung it around to make contact with his head. It took a few hits before he let her throat go. Bry paused to take a huge breath and compose herself. The red hand marks began to bruise around her pale skin as she hopped off the table. She then continued to hit the man with the ball in her hand over and over again. The man finally fell over dead and Bry dropped the bloody ball. She took another moment to catch her breath before walking out the room to join the others. Pepper and Conway were on the ground rolling around and punching each other violently. They finally reached the back exit, and Conway tried to reach the door, but Pepper kicked him hard and dragged him backwards. Pepper got the upper hand and started to choke Conway. Just as Conway was about to pass out, Pepper was hit behind the head. The judge fell over knocked out cold. Ash, please help me. Conway coughed a bit as he held his hand out. I already have, and then I should have let you die. You are the weakest mortal I have ever been with. You can't even stop 6 people from taking over your own home. She scoffed. What are you talking about? We were blindly attacked. Conway muttered. You should have prepared for this. Do you think Nero or Hitler was ill-prepared? Asher rolled her eyes and bent down to get face to face with Conway. You let your ego get in the way. Your parties and women and lust for power blinded you of your true purpose. Lucifer promised me what I wanted. You promised. Conway yelled. Yeah, well, we lied. You think you were really the one to become the true Antichrist? She rolled her eyes. Only one worthy of that title will be from the bloodline of Lucifer himself. Also, he will be from the land that they call holy. The Jews will never follow some country white boy. She used her hand to push on his forehead. Conway went backwards as he watched her walk over him. So I was just a pawn, of course. You all are. Once this gets out that the judge attacked the congressman at his home due to the laws, what do you think will happen? Stronger laws, and the judges will definitely be labeled the villains by not only the American people, the world. There will be a mass killing of God's elect. Asher laughed as he walked out the door, leaving it open. So run all you like, piggy. Your death is not far now. Ash made oinking noises as she vanished. Conway quickly got on his feet and ran out the back door. As Hans and Pamela made their way towards Michael and Colin, a huge winged creature came bursting through the floor. The thing went to attack Pamela, but Hans pushed her out of the way. The thing pinned Hans to the wall with a long talon. Pamela let out a scream from the floor as Michael ran over to slash at the creature. One of the wings knocked Mike back. He hit the door and slid down. The lion ran towards the creature, but it took flight. Pamela rushed to the bear and then removed the long talon that had broken off in his shoulder. It was pinning him to the wall and causing him great pain. The lion jumped up and snapped at the creature, but could not catch it. It slashed at the lion and screeched. Pamela helped Hans down, and her head turned to check on Michael. "Michael," she called out frantically. "I am all right." He stood up and shook his head a bit. The three continued to watch the lion swat at and try to bite the flying creature. The massive thing used its back claws to grab one of the lion's shoulders, digging and causing blood to surface. Colin wiggled and roared under the claws as it tried to lift him off the floor. Bri walked out of the room to see the chaos. She then looked up at the chandelier right above the creature and got an idea. She ran past Michael, calling for his sword. Mike threw it towards her, and Bri caught it as he ran up the stairs. When she reached the top, she jumped on top of the chandelier and with one swipe, cut the chains holding it. The massive metal and glass came crashing down on the creature. Bri flipped off and landed hard on the floor. Colin was able to wiggle out of the claws of the creature as it fell to the floor with the chandelier killing it. Bri lay on her back breathing heavily. "Is it dead?" she asked without looking. "My love, it is more than dead. It is like a pancake," Hans replied. "Good, now someone go help the old man." Bri slid the sword back to Michael. Mike stopped it with his foot and popped it up. He caught it by the hilt and took off running. The lion was not far from him. "Oh yes, Pamela, he is a keeper." Hans winked at her. Pamela shook her head as Hans let out a chuckle. The laugh caused him pain and he let out a groan. Colin and Michael both ran towards the back of the mansion looking for Pepper and Conway. Michael went one way and Colin went the other. The lion came across Pepper, who was slowly coming to. He noticed the lion and jumped back a bit. "Where is Conway?" Colin asked. "I don't know. I just came to a slan," Pepper huffed. Colin noticed the open door and sniffed the air. The lion then ran past Pepper towards the darkness of outside. A few seconds later Michael came running by to see Pepper rubbing the back of his bald head. "Where is Colin?" he asked. "Mufasa ran out that way." Pepper pointed and then looked at his hand, where he had wiped the small bit of blood that had formed from the back of his head. Chapter 22. Eliza paced in front of the car nervously. She could hear the gunfire and screaming below. This made her very concerned for her cousin and new friends. Otto leaned against the van watching her pace. He let out a long and deep sigh. "Eliza, I am sure they are fine." "You say that, but you can hear what I hear, right? The man has a small army down there. An army versus 3. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself as she finally stopped pacing. "Their God is with them. I always heard good things about him, like the fact he helps the underdogs." Otto glanced down at his fingernails and picked at them a bit. Eliza knew he was right. God was on their side, she just needed to have faith. The Native American took a deep breath and began to pray silently to herself. A small wave of peace passed over her, but also a feeling of warning. It was a sense that danger was coming and she needed to prepare. Eliza opened her eyes and searched the surrounding area. Otto glanced up and noticed her looking around them. "What is the matter?" he asked. "I am not sure, I just have a feeling something bad is coming." As Conway escaped from the fighting taking place at his Mason, the congressman ran up the small hill and towards the tree line. He exited and ran forwards looking behind him. He was not paying attention to where he was going due to his recent betrayal. He was supposed to be the Dark Kingdom's golden boy, and now he was a man running for his life. Ashera, his consort, betrayed him. Everything he had worked for and gained was lost that night. Without paying attention, Conway runs into Eliza and Otto. All three of them blinked in a state of unbelief. Eliza could not believe this scared man was the one responsible for all this. Otto couldn't believe the enemy was practically handed over to him, while Conway could not believe there were others still wanting to capture or even kill him out here. He thought that surely all of them were in his mansion below. Oh, how wrong he was. Even though he was beaten and exhausted, Conway put up his fists ready to fight. He still had his power of strength given to him by Mammon, and he would use it to fight his way through these two. Otto stepped in front of Eliza and gave Conway a menacing stare. The Nightmare King had been itching for a fight. Even though he was fully human now, he missed the thrill of it. Finally a worthy opponent. Otto balled his fists as he slowly walked towards Conway. Elsa was frozen in fear. She could feel her heart pounding so hard it felt as if it was going to leap from her chest. Conway let out a yell in anger, and this caused Eliza to flinch. The two men ran at each other like two bucks and clashed. They threw punches towards one another, but no one landed a blow. Their arms entered locked again, and the two began wrestling. Eliza took off towards the van and flung open the driver's side door. She then began laying on the horn, hoping Colin or the others would hear. Conway was worn out, but he still was strong. Otto could feel Conway's dark powers radiating off of him, and for a split second Otto wished he had his own. I see a sheriff has found a new pup. Otto grunted as he finally threw Conway on the ground. Conway gasped for air as he tried to catch his breath. Otto went to bend down to grab Conway, but the Congress tossed dirt in his eyes. Otto groaned in pain and instinctively tried to wipe the dirt from his eyes. This gave Conway the opportunity to tackle Otto to the ground. Conway mustered all his remaining strength and pressed his thumbs into Otto's eyes. He then started to punch the king repeatedly before he began to choke him. Eliza heard gurgling and stopped blowing the horn. She ran back around the van to see in horror Conway choking Otto. "Stop it!" she screamed. The words echoed as she screamed it over and over again. Conway finally punched Otto in the throat, breaking his windpipe. Eliza couldn't take it anymore. She ran up to Conway and placed her hands on each side of his head. She screamed as she dug into his skin with her nails. As she did so, she began to drain Conway of his powers. Conway yelled in pain as he felt not only his nails dig into him, but his powers being ripped from him violently. Conway finally grabbed her wrists and threw her off of him. Eliza flipped over Conway and landed on the ground. The bloody congressmen struggled to get up, all the while glaring at her. Eliza slowly started to scoot away on her back away from the advancing Conway. She could see the hate and bloodlust in his eyes. He was no doubt going to kill her, and she had no way of fighting back. In her fear she let out a growl and then a small roar. It was a lion roar, but it was very faint. Conway stopped and tilted his head. Was that a roar? Another lion. With a pathetic roar, ha. Conway went to bend down a bit and froze when he heard a majestic and loud lion roar come from behind him. Colin leapt through the air and pounced on top of Conway. The lion began to maul Conway, and Eliza hid her face from the violence. Even though she could not see what was happening, she could hear the screams of Conway's dying breath. A few seconds later the screaming stopped and there was an eerie silence.